It's time, of course, to jump back into part 3 this time around of my ongoing sport mode journey to get the final trophy to unlock the Platinum achievement in Gran Turismo 7. Last time around I got up to 10 races finished in sport mode. This time around, this week, I'm up to about 18 events. I reran a couple of the Daytona and Dragon Trail things, and of course, like I said last week, I'm not going to go into an in-depth dive of every single race, because it's not that some races are particularly good or bad. That's kind of the point. Sometimes a race is just kind of okay, or ho-hum at best. This time around I definitely had a couple of notable ones, a couple of fun times, and even then it's more so just a couple of interesting moments or interactions within certain events, especially at Laguna Seca for me, and then other times some just really poor events. One in particular in the more recent ones at Grand Valley in Group 4, really didn't enjoy it, again with that kind of mismatched way of handing out penalties. You'll see that later on. But also wanted to start with one of the most annoying penalties I've had so far, which was on a rerun that I did of Dragon Trail in an Alpha 155. It was going through that treacherous section, yet again like the Monaco square corners, and then a car, if I recall correctly, bounced off of the right wall, didn't ghost, because usually the game seems to ghost it for you, and just allowed it to careen straight into my car, and then gave me the penalty for it. That's probably one of the most egregious ones I've had so far, and just being like, what was the game even trying to do with that? Like, what was the point of that penalty? How on earth did it come to that conclusion? I really don't know. But beyond that, this time around I wanted to talk more about some of the abstract thoughts that I've had rather than, race by race breakdowns. We'll do some of that as well, but I wanted to get your thoughts. Those who maybe do a lot of sport mode racing, maybe those who have dabbled in it, maybe those who, and I know there are certainly some of you, who seem to prefer the Gran Turismo sport way of doing sport mode rather than 7. And even for me, I do think that what I remember of doing sport mode in that very limited series that I did back then, I definitely enjoyed those races more than I have these so far, and I think it's for a couple of reasons, and this is where I really want to hear your thoughts, especially those who have maybe done a deep dive on this. The matching system in this game seems a bit weird, and I say a bit weird, it's extremely weird to me, because I don't recall in sport, that is GT sport, not just sport mode, I don't recall being put into rooms, and I guess you could easily check this in that series that I did, but I don't recall being put into rooms where I was always the slowest person there. Whereas this time around, in GT7, it seems very strange to me that, kind of like how the daily roulette spins never land on the most valuable thing. In fact, for me, it seems to pretty consistently land on 99 times out of 100, the worst possible prize you can get. And I know for others you have that too, kind of proving beyond any doubt that it definitely is not random. In this mode, how can I always be the slowest person in the room? Like, that doesn't make sense, because think about it from the other player's perspective. Another person, it was in that same room as me, and by definition they were placed higher on the grid because they did a, for example, quicker qualifying time. Well then why is it that I'm never that person? How come in every single lobby, despite the fact that we all, if not mostly, have the same driver rating, the same sportsmanship rating, and I guess similar lap times, I would imagine that's pretty much how it would match you, why am I always matched at the bottom? And it's always in like the bottom 2 or 3. I'm not complaining about being a slow driver. Like I've said before, I don't really care about that. What I find strange is, why does it always seem to matchmake me in a room where I am among the slower, and never, I mean, watch the series, you've seen every race I've been in mostly, it never puts me in the higher grid of the room. That seems very odd to me. Maybe there's some obvious thing with, an algorithm to do with B and S and lap times that I'm overlooking or just aren't aware of, which is why I said I'd love to hear about that if somebody has done a deep dive on it, but it definitely comes off as very strange. And let's be honest, that's not something which should need research. It's something which the game should make pretty clear, why the game is structured that way. It's a pretty obvious piece of information for you to know, and also to know how you could improve that, because this brings me to the second issue which I have with sport mode, and why I think I'm really not enjoying doing this trophy. See, it took me this long to do the trophy, because as I said before, primarily, I didn't think I could ever get the trophy, because that rain license was always bugged. They finally fixed it. I bought the expensive cars that were needed for the other trophy, so I thought this was the only one left, so I might as well do it, and that's still what I plan to do. But the aspect of the game that has never interested me that much has always been sport mode, because if I want to race people and have fun, there are lobbies for that. Whereas sport mode, and this is I think really the key, sport mode is what Kaz is really all about. It's not just about racing, it's not just about having fun. This mode is actively about finding essentially the next Schumachers, the next Sennas, etc. That's the kind of whole point of the game, very clearly so. That's fine. but the issue arises wherein that kind of makes it extremely limited in terms of how much entertainment you can get out of it if you're not interested in being like the best person in the world. Now that may be a really obvious thing to say, and I'm sure plenty of people have already come to that conclusion, but here's the issue that I have. I don't remember having that problem with the game in GT Sport, because even though I didn't do much sport mode racing, the stuff that I did do, I quite enjoyed. Whereas this time around, I mostly don't enjoy it at all. It feels like an absolute chore. Like I said, I'm always in rooms where I'm absolutely not going to win the race. The only victory I had out of the entire run so far was on Route X, which was the very first race. You saw me win it, and I only won there because it was a relatively even playing field, and I spent so much time racing on Route X that I knew how to win. You could say, well, just apply that to every track. Well, yeah, but not really, because if you're consistently put into rooms where you are simply slower, like best case scenario, even your qualifying time is 2, 3, 4 seconds off the top 3, top 4 people, I don't really see how that's supposed to encourage you to do more of it. It seems like the system has changed fundamentally from GT Sport and it's been refined into 7, wherein in Sport, it seemed like there was a little bit more fun. A little bit more like the game was kind of trying to encourage you to be better. It was motivating you to kind of, be a better driver, have better sportsmanship, have better etiquette, and kind of take this more seriously, become more professional, and then you'll get more out of the game. Now, maybe it's just me that took that from it, but I feel like a lot of you did too. That just doesn't feel like it's there for me, honestly, at all in this game. And maybe that's just my experience, which is exactly why I'm asking for your experiences, but it seems like the game has become very black and white about it. It's like you're either quick or you're not, and if you're not, we don't want you. That's a weird approach to take. And the reason why I think it's a weird approach isn't because I fundamentally have any problem with that. You don't hear me complaining, for example, that I'm not on the starting block at the Olympics. I'm never going to be, but also don't care. Whereas with this game, it's like, even if you dip your toe into this water, I feel like you're just immediately battered by all this, back of the grid being bad drivers, you put at the back of the grid, no apparent reason in my case, you have no chance of winning the race because of course nobody's going to make enough mistakes for you to overtake them. Even if you did, they're just so much quicker per lap that you are never going to win. So it seems like the game immediately wants to tell you, you ain't nothing, you may as well leave. And maybe that's just how it comes off to me, but it's a very weird way of structuring the matchmaking. And I think that that is strangely compounded by the fact that the penalties are so badly implemented. Because on the one hand, the game wants to almost give off, or certainly seems to want to give off this really serious, you should take this seriously and we want the best of the best and the cream of the cream, and we're really proving who is the Olympic level athletes here, or rather who are the Olympic level athletes or future ones. But then at the same time, it can't even have a system where it implements the penalties in a correct way, which I'm sure even for those people has got to get annoying. I'm sure many of those really fast, really good drivers have been hit with annoying penalties or things which shouldn't have happened because of either bad racers being in the room or, like in the case of mine earlier on, to highlight the point, something which literally was out of your control that you had no cause in and that you were not at fault in any way for. That has got to be annoying for those people. And it almost makes me think, to be honest, that if I were going to advise Kaz on, why would he ever listen to me of all people, but if I were going to have sport mode like this in a game, and if I had the job of structuring, okay, moving forward, how would you do this better? Because, a big point of criticism is you need to have a suggestion on how to do things better, not just complain about it for the sake of it. So what would my suggestion be? How would I make this better? Well, to be honest, to make it more strict to get in. See, the Olympics doesn't care about being inclusive. And I mean that as much as you are either good enough or you're not. And if you're not good enough, you're not even going to get to the event because you'll be, whittled out before that time. And even though this has elements of that structure, wherein you could view sport mode as like the tryouts and the live events as the actual Olympics, which is true to some degree, the way it feels is that it doesn't actually work that way, because you do have people that are genuinely that quick, but they end up being shoved in rooms with, let's be honest, people like me, who aren't bad drivers, but just aren't even close to giving those kind of people a challenge, and are somebody who you will never even see during the race, because you're not quick enough to lap me, but you're also never going to see me because I'm behind you on the grid and we'll never catch up. So it means that not only is my experience hampered by being so slow that I could never win, but it means that those who are that quick, aside from maybe 1 or 2 other cars that they might have a good race with, are essentially racing with a bunch of what may as well be AI, because it serves them no challenge whatsoever and it's not giving them that much real world practice, because many of the people that they're coming up against aren't really good enough to properly challenge them. So if I were to make one fundamental difference, I think it might actually be, and this is going to sound really harsh, I think what I would actually do is literally have a gatekeeping system, because we currently have time trials and they update regularly. You earn some pretty good cash for it. And even for stuff like the World Series, you have to qualify. Well then, why not take that into sport mode? Why not have it so that race A, B and C, or maybe just B and C, however you want to structure it, the ones that actually matter in terms of, finding the cream of the crop, why not have it so that there is no qualifying time, or maybe in addition to the qualifying time, there is an entry requirement time. It specifically forces it to only be the top 1% players who can even enter the event. Now, some people might get annoyed by that, but for me personally, at least that makes it clear what this is actually all about. Because if you cut through all the BS, that is really what we're talking about here. That is the point of sport mode. Regardless of what anyone tries to say, that is where it all ends up. It is about the 1%. It's about the cream of the cream. It's about the Olympic level athletes, or at least finding the next Olympic level athletes. So then let's just cut to the chase and do that, because at least then you know where you stand, and it won't end up with people like me who are more, casual drivers who enjoy driving more than racing, and that is a crucial difference. Maybe really enjoy racing, but just will never be fast enough, whatever boat you happen to be in. And then it will not give those people false hope, and not necessarily end up with people, let's be honest, clogging up lobbies with much faster people, and also just having your experience kind of ruined by sport mode. Because instead of having fun in racing, you're just constantly being reminded, you ain't all that. You're not even close to winning this race, let alone being good at anything else. And for me, somebody who actively doesn't care about being the best in the world, that's fine. But I know there must be so many people who could have their spirits really crushed by stuff like that, who really do want to be like the best. And they never will be. They might not know that yet. They might be young, but they never will be. And it could just destroy them knowing that. Maybe again, you could say, well, at least they're going to know that and realign their expectations. Sure, but you could easily do that with the entry time requirement that I spoke about before. Because at least with that entry requirement, it proves immediately whether or not you are, factually speaking, fast enough to even be allowed into the club. Then, once you're in there, who is or isn't a good driver will naturally weed out itself. So I think that's the difference I would make for sport mode. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on it though. As far as the other races this time around, I feel like most of it wasn't a huge amount worth talking about. For me, I would probably say that this time around, a couple of the highlights were racing my Fallout liveried Genesis again at Laguna Seca. It started out well, and again, I must admit, I kind of lost interest. I find that for me, and I think I talked about this before, maybe even a couple of episodes back, that once I make a major mistake, it really affects me moving forward. I kind of think like, oh, just screw this. And it's more that I get annoyed with myself rather than other drivers, because I know that once you screw up that flow, you're not going to get it back again, or at least that's the case for me. And then the other race which was interesting was I raced the Aston GT3 car around Laguna Seca as well. You can't really go wrong with Laguna Seca, it's a fun event. I did make a mistake, if I recall correctly, and kind of lost a bit of ground, but it was probably the highlight for me this time around. It was a fun race, a fun car. I don't use the Aston that much, but it was quite a fun experience. Again, I already knew I wasn't going to win, nowhere close, but I think this time around that was probably the one for me. And in fact, the 18th race, so the last one up to making this video, was the one event that I did on Grand Valley. It was Group 4, of course, I chose the Ferrari 458. A ton of other people in the room had the 458 as well. I decided to do the early pit. I didn't actually notice if there was a mandatory pit. I can't recall if there was or not, but I assumed there was, being a race C, so I just jumped into the pits early on. I ended up making a little bit of ground on a Silvia, but again, it comes into what I said earlier on, where these just wildly inconsistent penalties come into play, where clearly the player just rammed into the back of me, and aside from maybe their score going down a bit, which I'm sure a player like that really cares about, not. There was nothing. If I'd have done that to them, damn well I'd have got a penalty, but for them the other way around, nothing. And in fact, the last note that I wrote on that race was literally, from now on is a slog. And that's probably not a good way of getting people to come back for future episodes of this series, but the thing is, whatever happens with who does or doesn't watch my little mini-series of getting the Platinum Trophy, I'm still going to do it, no matter what. As long as people want to see it and hear my thoughts on the experience moving forward, I'll still do the episodes. But of course I want to do the 50 no matter what. It's just that I feel like my expectations, especially this time around with this bunch of events, have really come into where I think they're going to be moving forward. Like, I'm getting more of a feel for what sport mode represents in this game. I'm certainly getting a good feel on how mismatched everything is, how of course bad the penalties are, that seems to be a consistent thing, and how it's an experience which overall, and this was another note that I made about a different event this time around, I just wrote the question, where's the incentive? Like, what's the point of this for someone like me? And I think the conclusion that I came to, and I was trying to be as brutally honest with myself as possible, is there is no incentive for someone like me, because it's not for me. And that goes back to what I said earlier on. Sport mode is not for people like me. It never will be. It's for the top 1%. That's why I said earlier on, if it's going to be for the top 1%, why not trim the fat, make the entry requirements higher, and then you can actually have sport mode be something that you might even prefer watching someone else do, rather than actually competing in it yourself. Maybe that's just me. I would love to hear thoughts on both sides, maybe if you agree or disagree, down below. And of course, I will, as I said, continue pursuing these events, racking up the 50, and I'll probably release another installment next week, roughly the same time. So I'll see you then, hopefully. Of course, if you're joining the series now, there are 2 previous episodes as well, and with some good and bad races all the time, as all of us have. Could be interesting to watch the other ones if you haven't. But I'll see you next time, and for now, thanks for watching.